When the first shots rang out at Lexington and Concord on that fateful spring morning in April of 1775, few could have imagined the 8 long years of bloodshed that lay ahead. The American Revolutionary War, lasting from 1775 to 1783, would become one of history's defining conflicts, pitting the mighty British Empire against 13 determined North American colonies fighting for their liberty and, ultimately, their independence. This was a war fought on multiple fronts, using both the disciplined linear tactics of European warfare and the cunning guerrilla strategies of frontier combat. The weapons wielded on these battlefields would decide the fate of nations and give birth to the United States of America. The weapons of this revolution were not entirely new inventions unique to this conflict. Many had been staples of European warfare for generations. The flintlock musket, for instance, had first appeared on battlefields in the early 1600s and would continue its reign of dominance for decades after American independence was secured. Yet some weapons, like the groove-barreled long rifle, represented newer innovations that would only come into their own in later conflicts, such as the Napoleonic Wars and the American Civil War. From the bayonet's cold steel to the thunderous roar of artillery cannons, these instruments of war shaped every engagement, every siege, every desperate charge across blood-soaked ground. At the heart of 18th-century warfare stood the flintlock musket, the primary weapon of every European army and therefore of both the British and American forces. This was a muzzle-loading, smoothbore firearm that fired a heavy lead ball with reasonable accuracy. A typical musket of the 1770s weighed about 10 pounds and stretched nearly 5 feet in length, with a caliber of approximately 3/4 of an inch. The lead balls fired from these weapons weighed roughly an ounce each. The flintlock mechanism itself was an elegant piece of engineering. A piece of flint held within the musket's hammer would strike against a steel plate called the frizzen when the trigger was pulled, creating a spark that ignited powder in the flash pan, which in turn discharged the musket ball from the barrel with deadly force. A well-trained soldier of the 18th century could fire his musket 3 or 4 times per minute, an impressive feat considering the elaborate loading process. First, the soldier would retrieve a pre-rolled paper cartridge containing both gunpowder and a lead ball, tearing it open with his teeth. He would pour a small measure of powder into the flash pan, then pour the remainder down the muzzle of his musket. Using a long ramrod, he would pack the ball, powder, and paper wadding deep into the breech. Only after returning the ramrod to its proper place beneath the barrel and pulling back the hammer to full cock was the weapon finally ready to aim and fire. Despite this complexity, disciplined armies could maintain devastating rates of fire through constant drilling and practice. The effective range of a musket was approximately 80 yards, though balls could sometimes travel up to 150 yards before losing momentum. However, accuracy depended greatly on the skill of the individual soldier. To maximize the weapon's effectiveness, 18th-century armies adopted linear warfare tactics, with soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder in 2 or 3 ranks. When officers gave the command, entire lines would fire synchronized volleys, creating walls of lead that could devastate enemy formations. Sometimes the first rank would kneel, allowing the second rank a clear shot, thereby maintaining a higher rate of continuous fire. It was this coordinated firepower, rather than individual marksmanship, that made the musket such a formidable battlefield weapon. The British Army's standard musket was the legendary Brown Bess, formerly known as the British Land Pattern musket. Introduced in 1722 and remaining in service until 1838, this three-quarter caliber flintlock became one of history's most recognizable military weapons. Its name likely derived from the brownish color of its barrel, though some romantics believed it honored Queen Elizabeth I, affectionately known as Good Queen Bess. The Brown Bess featured a steel ramrod instead of wood, increasing its durability, and incorporated a bridle to support the flash pan, improving reliability. With a barrel length of 39 inches by the late 1770s, and the ability to mount a 16-inch bayonet, the Brown Bess was a versatile weapon equally suited for volley fire and close-quarter combat. The French Charleville musket served as the other major firearm of the Revolutionary War. First developed in 1717 and serving as France's standard military musket until the 1840s, the Charleville had a caliber of .69 inches, making it slightly smaller than the Brown Bess. This was an intentional design choice to create a lighter weapon that soldiers could carry more easily during long campaigns. When France secretly began supplying the American colonies with military equipment before officially entering the war, hundreds of Charleville muskets found their way into colonial hands. After France formally allied with America in 1778, French soldiers brought even more Charleville muskets to North American battlefields, where they proved just as reliable and deadly as their British counterparts. American forces relied on a diverse arsenal of muskets throughout the war. Many colonists already owned variations of the Brown Bess, either purchased during the colonial period or acquired during earlier conflicts like the French and Indian War, which had ended in 1763. Others captured Brown Bess muskets from British soldiers or raided British arsenals. The Charleville muskets supplied by France became increasingly common as the war progressed. American gunsmiths also manufactured their own muskets, though these were often of inferior quality to European-made weapons. Interestingly, these American-made muskets were rarely branded with the gunsmith's name, as craftsmen feared being executed as traitors if the British won the war. The Continental Army and various state militias often suffered from inadequate supplies, leaving some soldiers to fight with old, outdated hunting muskets or whatever firearms they could acquire. The rifle represented a fascinating innovation in Revolutionary warfare, though it remained relatively unfamiliar to most Americans in 1775. John Adams himself wrote to his wife Abigail expressing his fascination with what he called a peculiar kind of musket known as a rifle. The American long rifle, also called the Kentucky rifle, distinguished itself from standard muskets through its grooved barrel, which caused the lead ball to spin as it left the weapon, dramatically increasing accuracy and range. Most rifles could hit targets at 250 yards, far exceeding the musket's effective range. However, the rifle came with significant disadvantages. It took more than twice as long to load as a standard musket, and could not mount a bayonet, leaving riflemen vulnerable in hand-to-hand combat and defenseless against bayonet or cavalry charges. At the war's outset, the Second Continental Congress ordered the formation of several rifle companies from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. These colonies were chosen specifically because their frontiersmen had experience using rifles as hunting weapons. The harsh frontier lifestyle had transformed many of these men into expert marksmen, with rumors claiming they could hit targets as small as an orange from 200 yards away. Commanders like the legendary Daniel Morgan utilized these riflemen as sharpshooters, tasked with targeting enemy officers to create confusion and panic. This tactic proved devastatingly effective during the battles of Saratoga in September and October of 1777, when Morgan's riflemen systematically targeted British officers. When British General Simon Fraser fell mortally wounded to a rifleman's bullet, the British troops panicked and fled, delivering a crucial American victory that would help turn the tide of the entire war. The British forces and their German allies also employed rifles, though in limited numbers. German auxiliary troops called Jägers, meaning hunters in their native tongue, were expert marksmen equipped with military rifles, typically 45 inches long with 30-inch barrels. These Jäger troops proved particularly terrifying to Continental soldiers at the Battle of Long Island in August of 1776, where their accurate fire caused significant casualties. The British also experimented with the Ferguson rifle, a revolutionary breech-loading weapon developed by Scottish Major Patrick Ferguson in 1774. This rifle could be loaded while the soldier lay prone, a significant tactical advantage. Major Ferguson famously used his rifle at the Battle of Brandywine in September of 1777 to shoot an American officer he mistakenly believed to be George Washington. However, only about 100 Ferguson rifles were ever issued, as they were expensive to manufacture and prone to mechanical failure. When Major Ferguson was killed at the Battle of Kings Mountain in October of 1780, production of his innovative rifle ceased entirely. When musket volleys could no longer maintain distance between opposing forces, battles often descended into brutal hand-to-hand combat. The bayonet became the weapon of choice in these desperate moments. This 16-inch steel blade could be fixed to any musket's muzzle, instantly transforming a firearm into a deadly spear. The socket bayonet design allowed muskets to fire even with the bayonet attached, enabling soldiers to transition seamlessly from ranged to close-quarter combat. These bayonets typically featured triangular blades, which were stronger than earlier single-edged designs. By the 18th century, the bayonet charge had become a standard battlefield tactic, designed to break enemy formations through sheer terror. The wounds inflicted by bayonets were often difficult to treat with the limited medical knowledge and supplies available to army surgeons, frequently resulting in infections that led to amputations or death. Officers and cavalrymen carried additional weapons suited to their roles and ranks. Flintlock pistols provided officers with personal defense, while swords and polearms served both practical and symbolic purposes. Officers' polearms functioned as symbols of rank and as tools for directing troops in the confusion of battle, helping to maintain formation and coordinate movements. Cavalrymen wielded pistols and sabers, with cavalry sabers being longer and heavier than the shorter swords carried by infantry officers. Knives and tomahawks also appeared frequently on Revolutionary battlefields, particularly among Native American fighters who allied with both sides, and among American riflemen who needed close-quarter weapons to compensate for their inability to mount bayonets. These diverse weapons ensured that soldiers had options for every situation, from distant volleys to desperate hand-to-hand combat. Artillery had been a crucial element of European warfare since the introduction of gunpowder, and the Revolutionary War proved no exception. The colonial conflicts between Britain and France had already introduced artillery to North American battlefields, with the British using cannons to great effect during sieges like Louisburg in 1745. As tensions escalated before the Revolution, British military officials desperately tried to prevent artillery pieces from falling into colonial hands. British raids on colonial weapons stores in search of hidden cannons directly led to the battles of Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, marking the war's violent beginning. Artillery would prove decisive in numerous engagements throughout the war, capable of devastating enemy formations at both long and short ranges, with varieties of ammunition from solid round shot to explosive shells. One of the war's most remarkable episodes involved artillery and occurred during the Siege of Boston, which lasted from April of 1775 to March of 1776. The Continental Army had successfully trapped British forces within Boston, but lacked sufficient artillery to force a conclusion. General George Washington dispatched Colonel Henry Knox on what would become one of history's most impressive feats of determination and logistics. Knox traveled to Fort Ticonderoga to collect its arsenal, which included 44 field guns, 14 mortars, and a howitzer. Knox's men loaded these massive weapons onto 42 sleds and embarked on an epic winter journey. They hauled tons of iron and bronze cannons through hundreds of miles of snow-covered wilderness, over mountain ranges, and across the frozen Hudson River. This expedition, forever known as Knox's noble train of artillery, culminated with the cannons' arrival at the Continental Army headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Washington positioned them on heights overlooking Boston, forcing the British to evacuate rather than face devastating bombardment. Field guns served as the workhorses of Revolutionary War artillery, appearing in battles from Princeton in January of 1777 to Monmouth in June of 1778, to the Siege of Charleston from March to May of 1780. Washington's artillery ranged from 3-pound to 24-pound cannons, typically cast in bronze. The British employed similar cannons, including a distinctive 3-pound field gun nicknamed the Grasshopper, which stood on legs instead of wheels and earned its name from the way it appeared to jump with each firing. Field guns primarily fired solid round shot, the cannonballs that have become iconic symbols of this era, but they could also discharge canister shot or grape shot when facing infantry assaults. Canister rounds contained numerous small projectiles encased together, which would spray outward in a deadly cone pattern when fired, causing horrific injuries to advancing soldiers and often stopping charges in their tracks. Heavier siege weapons like mortars and howitzers played crucial roles in extended sieges and urban warfare. Unlike field guns, which fired in relatively flat trajectories, mortars and howitzers could launch projectiles at high angles, allowing them to drop explosive rounds behind walls and fortifications. Mortars fired devastating explosive ammunition, including bombs and particularly terrifying carcass shots, which were described as circular metal baskets filled with gunpowder, saltpeter, and tallow. During the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775, it took only 2 carcass shots fired by British forces to engulf the entire town of Charlestown in flames, demonstrating the destructive power of these weapons. Field guns could reach targets up to 2,000 yards away, while mortars and howitzers typically had effective ranges around 1,300 yards. When operated by inexperienced gunners, as was often the case in the Continental Army's early years, effective ranges could shrink to as little as 400 yards, highlighting the importance of trained artillerists. The human cost of these weapons was staggering and sobering. As many as 25,000 Continental soldiers and American militiamen were killed or wounded during the Revolutionary War's long years, alongside approximately 2,000 French casualties and over 10,000 British and German losses. These numbers do not even account for those who died from disease or while imprisoned, which would significantly increase the death toll. Each casualty represented a life ended or forever changed by the musket balls, bayonet thrusts, saber cuts, and cannon fire that defined this conflict. From the flintlock muskets that formed the backbone of both armies to the breech-loaded rifles that hinted at warfare's future. From the brutal efficiency of bayonets to the thunderous devastation of artillery, these weapons shaped the American Revolution's outcome. The innovations and improvements made to these weapons during and after the Revolution would lead to even deadlier conflicts in the decades to come, including the Napoleonic Wars and the American Civil War, where the lessons learned in the American Revolution would be applied with even more terrible consequences. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating journeys through history. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next adventure into the past. Share this video with anyone who loves American history, and let us know in the comments which Revolutionary War topic you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.